So I've made a lot of mistakes over the years as a Christian apologist. Obviously, some mistakes are worse than others, but in this video, I'm going to help you avoid some of these mistakes. Hello, I'm Cameron Bertuzzi. Welcome to Capturing Christianity, a channel that exposes you to the intellectual side of Christian belief. If you're new to Apologetics, I've got some free resources that I want to give you. The first resource is a 60-page ebook that I co-authored with philosopher Dustin Crummett entitled The Rationality of Christian Theism. The second free resource is a PDF of a list of apologetics terms with definitions and explanations. To get your hands on both of these, just click the link in the description. And yeah, you can actually still get them if you're watching this on your phone. All right, so a couple caveats before we get started. So first, this list that I'm about to give you is not exhaustive. There's other things I think apologists should avoid. The ones that I mentioned in this video are just some of the most important. And then secondly, this list is born out of my own personal experience. I don't claim to be an expert on doing apologetics the right way. Take this list for what it is. If you find it useful, great. If not, sorry for wasting your time. And then lastly, I'm not saying I've mastered everything on this list. I have a lot of work to do in many different areas. And by the way, number 12 is probably the most important in this list, so you definitely want to stick around till the very end of this video. So number 1, don't think too highly of yourself. In psychology, there's this little thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. You may have heard of it. Basically, people often fail at accurately judging their level of competence. Less competent people tend to think that they're smarter than they actually are, and more competent people tend to think they're dumber than they actually are. And the point here is just simply to exercise intellectual humility. Don't think too highly of yourself or your abilities. Also, I mean, it's important to not think too lowly of yourself either. Romans 12:3 says, "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment." Reading a couple introductory apologetics books doesn't make you an expert in philosophy. It doesn't make you an expert in probability theory, ethics, cosmology, history, or any other sub-discipline. And on a related note, exercising intellectual humility can actually help you avoid embarrassment. So not only is this biblically mandated, it's also just very practical. And notice, I'm not saying think less of yourself. I'm saying think accurately of yourself and of other people. So put your pride to the side. So number 2, don't shoot from the hip. This should have been number 1. I've seen people make all sorts of weird and unsubstantiated claims when responding to objections. Instead of admitting, you know what, that's a good point, I really need to take that and think about it. Let me get back to you. Instead, a lot of people will just make up an answer. And I made this mistake actually a lot myself when I was sort of just starting out in my apologetics career. If you don't know what extra biblical evidence exists for the martyrdom of early Christians, don't just blurt out that tons of evidence exists. If you don't know something, be ready to admit it. Bluffing not only damages your credibility, it's also dishonest. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth." I should also note that there's absolutely no good reason to make things up. Uncovering an area of ignorance is actually an opportunity to grow in knowledge. Just think about that and keep that in mind as you're going forward in apologetics. All right, number 3, don't have the last word. All right, this might sound a little weird, but your idol, the thing that you value more than God, might be having the last word in a conversation. If you find yourself with a strong desire to leave the last comment, to say the last thing in a text thread, I suggest doing some serious introspection. What is driving that desire? Why do you have to have the last word? Leaving the last comment doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. Ending a conversation is actually a really uncommon thing to do online. We kind of just want to keep going and going and going and going and going. When atheists or Muslims notice that I've stopped responding to them on Twitter or social media, I sometimes get accused of incompetence or in some cases dishonesty. And the only reason why I mention this is to highlight the fact that we're pressured in all sorts of ways to leave the last word. Okay? I mean, I get it. I don't want to be accused of incompetence or dishonesty either. I want to defend myself on social media. But what I want you to think about is what is behind that desire? Why do we want so badly to leave the last word or leave the last comment? The more that I think about it, the more I'm convinced that our desire to have the last word is actually rooted in personal insecurities. So this takes me to don't number 4. Don't ignore your insecurities. Here's a little theory of mine. Online debating is largely the result of unchecked insecurities. Christians, atheists, agnostics, whatever, we're insecure about our beliefs and our intelligence, and thus we engage our peers in debate so that we can be validated and show others kind of how smart we are. These unchecked insecurities can, if we let them, rule over our thoughts and actions. But defending Christianity shouldn't feel like a competition. Before logging on, make a habit of asking yourself the question, why am I going online to debate today? And if you can't think of a good reason or a good answer to this question, it's probably time to reassess your motivations. Number 5, don't debate more than you read. So as a general rule, I think we should be not debating. We should be reading twice as much as we're debating. For every hour you spend online debating, you should spend at least 2 hours reading. Spend the majority of your time with credible experts. Learn how respected scholars express and defend their views. So here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you should never debate. But what I am saying is that you should keep the main thing. I can only imagine where I'd be if instead of debating online for countless hours, I used that time wisely and was reading good philosophy. Here's a question to ask yourself before each comment that you post. Should I continue doing this, or should I read that book I bought literally 2 days ago? Because let's be honest, if you're an apologist, you're in this space, you probably have a book you bought within the last few days, and it's just been sitting on your shelf. You may not have even taken it out of the package yet. Close your Facebook app, go read your book. By the way, YouTube is actually okay to stay on and watch all my videos and subscribe and do all the things. So YouTube's totally cool. All right, number 6, don't try to master every subject. All right, so if you try to master every single subject in apologetics all at once, you're not going to master anything. You're just not. So find the thing that most interests you and master that. And by master, I don't mean watch a couple online debates. I mean, consume literally everything you can about that particular subject. So for me, it's the argument from contingency. I've read all the latest and best material on the contingency argument that I can find. And by that, I basically mean that I've just been memorizing the work of Josh Rasmussen. But so I picked that subject, the argument from contingency, for one simple reason. It's just what I'm naturally drawn to. It's what I like to think about. So when you're picking an area of specialization, follow your interests. Take note of the subjects that sort of naturally capture your attention and just go for those. And doing this actually is going to help you avoid burnout. It's not completely going to avoid it, but it will considerably lessen your chances of burnout. And in my view, the next wave of apologists should be an army of specialists as opposed to one person who just does everything. Number 7, don't be a jerk. 1 Peter 3:15 says to always be ready to give a defense, but to do so in gentleness and respect. We all know this verse, at least if you're in apologetics, you know this verse, but do we actually live up to it? That's the real question. And if you're into apologetics, you're probably a pretty competitive person. You like to win. People win in different ways. For some people, the way that they win isn't by offering arguments, it's by making fun of people.
Are you seriously saying that wine turns into blood? Mock them, ridicule them.
For others, the way that they win is by psychoanalyzing why the other person believes what they believe.
Every Christian is needy.
The way that I used to win on Twitter was by using snark. Now, I'm not saying that you should never mock or psychoanalyze or use snark. Rather, I think that you should ask yourself what's behind it. Again, we want to do some introspection here. Are we doing these things to win, or are we doing this out of love for the other person? So it's the motivation behind the action is what determines whether you're genuinely trying to help or genuinely trying to be a jerk. This is an area that I constantly fail in, and I'm really trying to do better. All right, don't number 8. Don't forget how to have a normal conversation. This one is so important. I mean, don't turn every conversation into a debate. You don't need to do that. My wife knows when I go into apologetics mode during a conversation, I'm very thankful that she'll regularly call me out on it. A big giveaway is when I ask her to define some basic term. Well, honey, what do you mean by money? It's like when I start to do that kind of stuff, she knows. So don't assume that every little conversation that you have needs a heavy dose of apologetics. Most conversations don't need a heavy dose of apologetics, including conversations about apologetics. So don't forget how to have a normal conversation. This perfectly segues into don't number 9, don't abuse apologetics. I remember when I first started learning about philosophy, it was like I had been living my entire life with blinders on. Like I had some idea of how arguments worked and how to talk to people, but when I learned the different rules of inference, how to construct a valid argument, I could suddenly spot mistakes in other people's thinking, and it was almost like I gained a superpower. Like this is kind of why when you learn the names of various logical fallacies, all you kind of want to do is accuse others of committing them. Oh, and then by the way, some of us actually never grow out of this phase. But here's the point. Apologetics can be abused. Instead of really listening to what someone is trying to argue, it can be tempting to say the names of a couple fallacies and then claim victory. And in my view, this is actually a way of avoiding truth, or at least it can be. So here's another way of putting this. Apologetics can be used as a smokescreen for avoiding serious challenges that aren't wrapped in a neat, logically valid package. Don't exploit technicalities just so you can avoid dealing with good objections. If you're using apologetics in this way, you're not really seeking the truth, you're seeking affirmation or something else. All right, don't number 10. Don't neglect accountability. There's 2 ways in which apologists ought to be accountable. First, you need to be intellectually accountable, and then second, you need to be morally accountable. Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. The body of Christ is a beautiful thing. It really is. Surround yourself with other Christians that are smarter and more knowledgeable than you. Submit your ideas to them. Listen to their feedback. Not only is it going to open your mind to new ideas, it's really going to help make you or keep you humble. Pride is probably the number 1 pitfall in apologetics. Intellectual accountability is just vital. Can't stress that enough. Just as vital, if not more so, is moral accountability. Being an apologist doesn't make you immune to sin. Seems pretty obvious. The horrifying reports that came out of the investigation into Ravi Zacharias brought this point home in ways that I don't think any of us hoped it would. Romans 14:12, so then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. By the way, this applies to me too, applies to everybody. What's more, the Bible teaches that Christian leaders are held to higher standards. James 3:1, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. Fight darkness with light. Keep yourself morally accountable. One of the best ways to do this is to find someone that can help keep you accountable. Ignoring this advice could be literally the single worst decision of your life. All right, don't number 11. Don't neglect spiritual disciplines. As apologists, it's really easy to get so wrapped up in intellectual arguments that we really forget what this is all about. It's about Jesus. Christianity is it's not just an intellectual assent to a set of propositions. It's a commitment to the person of Jesus. Prayer is something that I don't do enough of myself. But listen to this passage from Paul. Quote, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. Colossians 1, 9 through 12. The importance of prayer in the life of a Christian apologist can't be overstated. Opening our hearts and focusing our minds on God will literally change the way that we engage others around us. It very well can. If you're feeling irritated or frustrated in a conversation, just like pause a moment and pray. Focus your attention back on God. And here's a related question to this. What's the ratio of time you spend studying your Bible versus the time reading philosophy? What about the ratio of Bible reading to debating atheists? It's just something to think about. Okay, don't number 12, our final don't. Don't forget about your mental health. I said this one was the most important, and it might actually be. Apologetics can be very, very stressful. It doesn't matter how well you think you handle stress, it can take a serious toll. Regularly engaging in apologetics can be anxiety-inducing and can even cause depression. So don't neglect your mental health. And I know that for me personally, I didn't want to admit the amount of stress that apologetics was causing me. The majority of that was actually due, I think, to pride. Like, I saw other people online handling stress really well, and I want to be like that. I want to be someone who can handle stress well. But I want to give you a little secret here. And that secret is this. Lots of people, including those that look like they're handling stress well, actually aren't. They aren't at all. You never know. You never know what people are going through behind the scenes. But the point here is that basically get over your pride, admit that you might have an issue. Okay, second, if you find yourself overly stressed when doing apologetics, consider the possibility that you should be doing it less, not more, less. Nothing in the Bible suggests that we should be battling atheists on the internet for hours and hours every day. Nothing in the Bible suggests that you should be accepting debates on huge platforms. Learn to take breaks. Learn to say no. Take your mental health seriously. Third, it might be time to consider hooking up with a mental health professional to look at some other options. It took me a few years of trial and error with different medications to find a combination that actually started working for me, and it's something that I still work on every single day. So fourth and lastly, don't think that your situation is too unique for anyone to help. That's actually one of the biggest mental health lies that we tell ourselves, is that my situation is so unique. No one's ever going to understand what I'm going through. Nothing is ever going to be able to help me. That is a big, huge, unevidenced lie. The reality is that many people have experienced what you're experiencing, and more than that, your situation can drastically improve. This is, again, why it's so important to hook up with a mental health professional. Oh, and there's actually one more don't that I haven't mentioned yet. That is, don't forget that Christianity is true.